Because Dan Graziano is reporting that Deshaun Watson met with the new head coach of the Texans, David Culley, late last week. And in that meeting, Watson reiterated his desire to be traded and told Culley he has no plans to ever play for the Texans again.
2 weeks before free agency, the Arizona Cardinals out of nowhere made what could be the biggest splash over the next month. J.J. Watt, the several-time Defensive Player of the Year, one of the best players who has ever played on the defensive line in the NFL history, agrees to terms on a 2-year, $31 million deal that is $23 million guaranteed. That is the value of J.J. Watt, a big-time leader and one of the new faces of the Arizona Cardinals franchise.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. And this week we're joined by Brandon Scott from Radio 610 and the B Block podcast. Brandon, how you doing? You surviving the power outage and all sorts of things in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I did surprisingly well, and I appreciate you for asking. It was more of a frustration thing that had happened to begin with, and it was more of seeing what other people were going through. But I actually did surprisingly well. Only lost power for a little while, and was always able to find a place to go. So it wasn't quite as bad for me, but obviously, it was a disaster. So glad to be out of that, man, for sure.
Yeah, it kind of seems like everything that could go wrong sometimes in Houston in the last couple of years has hit it, and definitely some resilient people across the H. But this week we've got voicemails, video games in your office, and all sorts of things to talk about. But I think the biggest news is definitely JJ signing with the Cardinals. I think when he said he wanted to go for a ring, I didn't really think Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury was the destination everybody had in mind.
Yeah, same. I think for me, and it's the second name that you mentioned, that's the biggest surprise for me is Cliff Kingsbury. To me, that's the biggest question mark with the Arizona Cardinals when you look at it. I mean, they obviously have some roster needs aside from signing J.J. Watt that they need to address, I feel like, to become a contender or to be better than the middling team that they were. And I know Kyler Murray got hurt toward the end of last season, but the biggest question mark for me is Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, he seems to be the guy that continues to fall up no matter the fact that he has not been successful almost anywhere that he's been, or impressive for that matter. People talk about the air raid. He's supposed to be this, orchestrator of some kind of air raid offense. And, I don't see much of air raid at all in Arizona. And, it's just a question mark. Now J.J. Watt obviously bolsters that defense, and I think that he makes that defense more interesting. They still need cornerback help. I don't know what the deal is with Patrick Peterson. He's not the same player he was. They've got other issues aside from just, adding a pass rusher. And I do think that him and that J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones will be a nice tandem at pass rush. But it's hard to look at the Arizona Cardinals in that division with that coach and think, yeah, that's going to be the breakthrough. It's hard to think that.
Yeah, I think Kingsbury, it was kind of a shock when he got the job, wasn't it? Because he failed, reasonably speaking, at Texas Tech, goes to USC, takes the OC job, reneges on that offer, and somehow winds up with an NFL head coaching gig. So yeah, I don't know.
So think about what you just said, though. Like, that's exactly what happened. He failed up twice. He probably, like the USC job, okay, maybe, but he didn't do well at Texas Tech. He gets the USC job, doesn't coach for a second at USC, and fails up again and gets the Arizona Cardinals job. It is incredible. It is an incredible kind of story when you look at it, like how he was able to pull that off.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to win this year, because I think when you watched them last year, they were probably limiting on both sides of the ball for whatever reason. On offense, it was up front. Kyler takes some hits,
right? And
then I think on the defensive side of the ball, there were just kind of some pieces there, but nothing that's going to make obviously their pass rusher missed last year. You got Jordan Phillips there, who's not quite kind of coming in the game, but yeah, a surprising one for JJ. I saw today something on NFL Network, and they said that he was never just going to take a cut price deal to go and win somewhere. It was about a balance of both. And I don't know. I think it's a strange one. I don't know if there's a Vance Joseph element in there. Obviously, he was the close number two to Wade Phillips, and he was a big proponent of Watt and the reason why he was in Houston in the first place. And then you've also got the Hopkins factor. But I think everyone's got next season to look forward to, going up there on the road and watching Hopkins and JJ Watt playing for Arizona. I think it's probably something that people didn't see coming.
Well, I'll say this about it. I think that there is something to be said for just wanting to be happy and to enjoy where you're playing football. And it's not out of the question that the Cardinals could compete. We just don't see it. You don't see it. I don't see it. The Cardinals being contenders. But it's not out of the question. It could happen. But more than anything, the connections you talk about, the comfort level of being there, having some intel on Arizona between, Vance Joseph, Wade Phillips, obviously DeAndre Hopkins is there, Angelo Blackson, a former teammate of his, either is there or was there. So you've got that. And I think that when you look at what was going on with the Texans, it became so much of just not enjoying where you were and the direction and just not believing in the team and just being unhappy. So, maybe this is just more of a move toward being somewhere where he feels good and feels like he can enjoy going to work. The idea of ring chasing, I know it's real interesting to us. And I think that JJ Watt is aware of his legacy, but not to go too off topic, but we were talking to Zach Greinke yesterday, the pitcher for the Houston Astros, and someone asked him about wanting to win a World Series because he hadn't won one. And it made me think about JJ Watt, or I thought about that after the JJ Watt signing, because the thing that Zach Greinke said was that, it's not so much as you can just say, I'm going to win a World Series, or I want to win a World Series, so I'm going to win a World Series. Same thing with JJ Watt. It's not like he can just say, well, I'm going to go to the Ravens and we're going to win a Super Bowl. Or I'm going to go to the Kansas City Chiefs and we're going to win a Super Bowl. It's just not as simple as that, and that's hard for us to process as, content creators and people who are so interested in the game and in the narratives. But for JJ Watt, it might have just come down to, man, I can get $23 million guaranteed to go to a place where the weather's nice and I like the people and it feels nothing like where I was at. So I think it could just come down to that, even though, like you said, you got Kyler Murray running for his life. The weapons outside of DeAndre Hopkins are, kind of sort of spotty. And that offensive line is the biggest question mark. And then like you said, the defense. I mean, this is not a complete team in any way. JJ Watt helps them, but they still have a lot of work to do. So from a competitive standpoint, it's definitely curious. You think, well, why not the Buffalo Bills or Baltimore Ravens, or something like that. The Cardinals, beyond me, but it could be more. It could be more than just winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a year-to-year league, so you never know who's going to. And it's not without the realms of possibility. A team that's not all that great win 10 games and get to the playoffs. We've seen O'Brien do that a number of times here in the last couple of years, so it's definitely not out with the possibility of them winning. Winning winning a couple of playoff games and maybe getting a chance to go run in the postseason. But from that, talking about guys that are unhappy, you go Watson. It comes out almost 10 days after the fact that David Culley originally was reported that they met, and then it was a Zoom call. I think it was following Deshaun and his quest around the country with classic sports cars or whatever they're doing, but it seems on some kind of tour and some kind of business setup he's got in the off season. But it comes out, and I suppose there's nothing new really to report, isn't it? That Culley's brought in, and say what you want about the hire. I don't think this was ever going to be the point of inflection that things will change or become definitive, but certainly it seems like we're still at a standoff in terms of the team are not willing to listen to any trade offers. And Watson's, pretty effusive in his position that he will not be back. So I don't think there's anything to report, but yeah, it feels like the news came out at quite an odd time. I think when the Russell Wilson stuff started hitting the headlines, that then comes out 10 days after.
Yeah, I think that with Deshaun, we're at a point where, or I'll speak for myself. I reached a level of fatigue, but I'm also still at the edge of my seat because it feels like there is a deadline. There's this deadline leading up to the draft in April that you feel like is kind of arbitrary, but exists in some way. But you're on the edge of your seat, kind of waiting on something to happen. And the David Culley news was, I feel like, was an interesting tidbit because we hadn't learned anything new, but all it did was sort of reaffirm, I think, what the belief already was with this situation and Deshaun Watson and the Texans and the divide. Like David Culley's a guy who was on none of our radars, even 2-3 months ago. Not even a guy most of us had ever heard of or could tell you anything about. And now supposedly he's supposed to be the bridge between Deshaun Watson and the Texans. Like, it's not realistic. The reports were that Deshaun did this out of respect for David Culley, his age and his, sort of tenure in the NFL, like just as a respect for a guy. And I think there's something to probably, being a black head coach, you probably want to show some respect. I kind of know what Deshaun Watson is about in some of those respects. Probably wanted to show some respect to the guy. But that's not going to be the difference maker. I mean, what can you tell me about David Culley's offensive scheme or philosophy or vision for a football team? You remember Nick Caserio said, was it? Yeah, I think it was the David Culley introductory press conference where Nick Caserio says, we have no interest in trading the player, and we have a vision for the player, or vision for Watson and the team, or something to that effect. And no one pushed back on it. When I think back, no one actually asked the question, what is that vision that you supposedly have for Deshaun Watson? Because we can't see it. It seems like this thing is headed for an end. So I'd be curious to know what supposedly is this vision. I can't imagine it being something that would captivate Deshaun Watson at this point. So yeah, I mean, we're at that point where, in my view, it still seems like a bad idea to trade Deshaun Watson. Like I've not reached the point where I actually think that it would be good for the Texans. It could be, but it's hard to sell myself on saying definitively that it would be good for the Texans. I lean toward it being bad. So I'm still at the point where I'm like, hey, man, maybe don't do this. But it's also obvious that, or it at least seems obvious, that the guy has no interest in playing for the team anymore. And there doesn't seem to be a solution to that other than to trade him. So, I'm glad to not personally be in Nick Caserio's spot, but where I am as far as what the news and the narratives are, is the thing about Nick Caserio not taking offers or listening to offers. I don't believe that this these funny stories that we hear about him not answering the phone, or maybe there have been voicemails, maybe there have been situations where he didn't answer the phone, but I don't believe that he's not entertaining offers, because that would just be, that would be negligent. That would be idiotic. He wouldn't be doing his job if he didn't listen or at least have an awareness for what the market is for Deshaun Watson. Like, that would just be ridiculous. So I don't believe that. As ridiculous as things are with the Texans, and as ridiculous as we know things can go over there, I don't think that part is happening. But I would agree, though, if their stance is still that, hey, we don't want to trade Deshaun Watson. We still want to see if there's any chance that we can keep Deshaun Watson. We are hard stop against trading him. We'll listen because that's our job, but we still don't want to do it. I tend to agree with that. So that's where I am with it, but I am on the edge of my seat to see what they could get for Deshaun Watson, or at what point do they finally pull the plug on this thing? Because it's just so fascinating. This never happens. I was saying this on my podcast, I think last week, that, for me, as far as with trading Deshaun, I'm not at the point where, hey, you just trade him just because he's unhappy or just because you're at this impasse or just because it seems unavoidable. I still feel like you go at it with an attitude of, hey, we have a price for Deshaun Watson. We have an expectation for what we want to get. And to sort of figure out what that actually is. To me, it's the Jets picks. It's the getting your pick back from Miami. It's Trevor Lawrence. And then you've got this next tier of ideas of the Carolinas and Denvers of the world, the Chicagos of the world who want to be in the mix, who I don't see as much being in the mix until there's a more imaginative kind of deal out there that I just don't know of. So, I'm not here for, hey, just trade him because he's unhappy and because he's never going to play here again. No, figure out what the actual best deal is, and if it's something that, if it's something of the caliber of what I think the Jets could offer, what Miami could obviously offer, or what obviously what Jacksonville could offer, and I think that's far less likely. Then you do it.
Yeah, I think that it's funny because you think if there was to be a point where they fix it, and you go back to that scheme point you made, like what is David Culley's scheme? Well, you've kind of kept Tim Kelly around to hope that they say, well, we'll just run it back with the same scheme that, let's be honest, took 4 years to get there with them because there's a lot of option routes, at the line of scrimmage reads, all this kind of stuff. It takes time for any guy coming from the college game to mentally get to that level, to tune into that, to actually make it work. And we saw the amount of resources that they just plowed into that offense scheme to try and make it work. And we know how talented he is. But even with that talent at quarterback, it still didn't look all that great apart from times last season, which might well be his last ball for the team. But as you said, what's the scheme? What's the philosophy? What's going to change with Pep Hamilton as a quarterback's coach? I just think if you're Deshaun, you say, well, you wasted the time you had with me in my rookie year or my rookie deal. How can I possibly look at this roster or look at the setup and the changes you made without consulting me and get me to buy in? I just don't see how that's going to happen. And I think that the outcome's possibly just a hardball of both sides, unless some team comes in and makes an offer. Literally, they just can't say no to. But I think, as you said, unless it's one of these teams who've got two of the teams, plus Jacksonville, who've got the first overall pick, which is kind of worth more than, say, the third or fourth pick. But unless you've got a team that's going to come and give you, that doesn't have multiple picks in 1 year in the first round, it's got to be, for me, it's got to be 3 firsts, 3 seconds, and 3 thirds or something to that effect with players. And it's just like the ultimate price you can pay. And it was just something you can sell. But then I suppose the only way you sell and you turn the page is by having a replacement at that position. And that's going to be pretty hard to come by unless they're in the couple of the top positions. And you've seen, it's been a well-versed stat or certainly that everybody's aware of, that in the last 15 years, there's a single quarterback drafted in the first round still on his team before the Mahomes and Watson class from 2009 to 2016. So, there's a lot to lose and little to gain, I think. But I think this season's a write-off anyway. So I've been of the opinion, well, why don't you just let him sit, save the money on the cap? He can accrue over $20 million in fines. And does his value change in a year?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair question. I would even go before that and a step ahead and say, I don't think it's so much about him changing his mind about the Texans as it is, because, why would he do that? But it could be more so him changing his mind about whether he is willing to sit out. I was thinking about this before we got on here. Like, so much of the conversation about what he's willing to give up centers around like the money and the fines and all of that. And I think Deshaun Watson is unique in a situation like this from the players that we normally discuss in these kind of scenarios, in that he's already made so much money. He's rich enough to say no to a certain amount of money. But I'm not going to dismiss the idea of maybe he doesn't want to, maybe he's rich and also just doesn't want to say no to the money. And aside from the money, there's a pride factor in playing and wanting to be out there and wanting to add to your legacy. Deshaun Watson just came off of a career season, the best season he's had by a lot of metrics. The best or top 3 quarterback in the league last year. It's why the discussion is so is so interesting as it is right now, and you think that he just wants to not follow that up, just like you're coming off a career year, your career high, and you don't want to play anymore. Like I'm not opposed to the Texans rolling the dice on that. I don't think that it would be a bad idea to say, hey, I don't know if Deshaun Watson really just doesn't want to play through 2021. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. So there's a chance he even comes back. Now, to your point, it's probably a better idea for Deshaun and the team. Like that's what I'm talking about is more, competitive legacy macho stuff. But as far as strategy, might be a better idea for both of them to, especially if you don't find that deal that you like, to sit it out. Season's a wash, like you said. Deshaun Watson's got nothing to prove. If things could be amicable, they could figure out a way where he could sit out. They could agree to it and he could get paid, and it doesn't have to be a fuss. Now, obviously, there's some conflict, and I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I could see that being a better play where, hey, let's let things cool down a year. Let's at least give David Culley a chance. Let's give Nick Caserio a chance to have a draft and a free agency cycle and figure this thing out. See at least see what it looks like through the year. If you're not expecting to win, at least be sort of monitoring the process and see how you feel next year. I think I actually think that is in play, especially if the best the Texans are offered is one of these lesser deals that we don't think would be wise. Like I said, I think there's a standard for what you trade Deshaun Watson for. A lot of what you mentioned, 3 firsts, 3 seconds, 3. It's got to be, or a package of proven players. Along with some of those draft picks, something to that effect. Like it can't be, just because the guy's unhappy. That's not going to work for me.
Yeah, he's under contract, and he happily banked that signing bonus, and he's never played a down under that contract. So it's there's a bit. I suppose it goes both ways, and you start to see that bit of where does because I think the notion that there should be no player ever bigger than the club, right? And that's always it's always true in every sense of it. But I think that the issue is when you've got, the ownership issue where no one trusts the owner, and no one trusts the owner of the people have hired. Therefore, by default, I've still got questions about Nick Caserio, and will continue to have questions about Nick Caserio, considering the head coach that he hired is only the real big move that he's made. It's all questionable. So therefore, it's obvious it's a talent deficient season, because if he became disenfranchised with the club last year after having a trying season when they lost a lot of close games, one possession, late fumbles, twice against Indy, last second against Tennessee in the division, all this kind of stuff. If that grated on you, try and play with this mob next season, because it's going to be even worse in terms of results, because the talent's taken a step back. If that was possible, it would certainly seem. I know we've still got to go through free agency, but in the draft, but unless they kind of get almightily lucky, then I think it's a challenge. Do you think that, Rand? Do you think there's something a theory that I've kind of had, and it's reading between the lines a bit? I never thought you'd ever question Watson's character, and I think you as a guy you probably can, but as you go through life, you change the people you're around, and especially when you move, he's not running with the guys that he used to hang about with as a kid. He's moved on. He's gone to college, and his life's again changed. And do you think now that he's got, and when I see Quincy Avery being really vocal in the media, when I see his agent continued to be even more of a presence, I suppose you could say the agent's probably warranted it with his position in terms of his earnings and the clients he's got. And then you see the kind of Instagram kind of personality persona of his other half. Do you think just the kind of people he's surrounded with slightly changed, and maybe that plus the player power that's definitely coming into this league, and of course the media want it because it makes great headlines, but the ability to stand up against an organization which previously they didn't have the ability to do. Do you think those two combined is kind of maybe making him make choices and follow advice that he wouldn't have previously?
I do think that there is a heavy influence from all of the characters that you mentioned. I don't necessarily think that that is the reason. I think the money, I think the money can change you a little bit and makes you more flashy. Like he just came into a lot of money, man. He really did. And so I think we are seeing that. I think these are probably interests that Deshaun perhaps had already, the cars and so a lot of the flashiness, the trips and just the sort of one thing we've said at the radio station at Sports Radio 610 is that Deshaun is going Hollywood. He's gotten paid. Again, I think he's always had sort of these interests, and these people have been in his life for a little while now. Like, they didn't just arrive. I know the girlfriend has been around for maybe a year plus, and he's had Quincy Avery and David Mulugeta in his camp for a while. Like, these people have been around him for a while, but I think what's happening is that with their success, and all of them, in their respective lanes, have had increased success over the last couple of years, have increased wealth profile in their own little respective corners of what it is that they do. Whether it be the agent, the quarterback, the influencer and brand specialist that the other half is. Quincy Avery is the quarterback coach. Like, they're all sort of emerging around this same time and together. And so I think that there is something to that. And I think that they are finding their voice and have opinions. And those opinions don't necessarily align with what fans want to hear, and maybe not even what's in the best interest of the team, but more so in the best interest of themselves. I understand that to a degree. I think it sucks for the Texans because just from the standpoint that Deshaun Watson is really the only thing that they've got going for themselves as an organization. So the idea of losing him is devastating, but I understand their perspective. The Hollywood and flashiness aside, I can't relate, but as far as the perspective on what's going on with the Texans, some of the things that are important to them, I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I definitely understand where they're coming from. And if I'm Deshaun Watson, I would have had questions about the Texans long before, even before it got to this point, and I'm sure he did. I think in times when I've spoken to him, he hasn't necessarily been as open and candid about it as maybe in other settings. If you notice that when Deshaun Watson talks to another former athlete, like a Carmelo Anthony or a Michael Vick, if you've ever done any listened to any of those clips from last season, but right before he signed this deal, he's a lot more candid and loose and kind of just says how he feels. With us, he's a little more guarded. I feel, and because I asked him straight up, hey, did you see this coming? When you signed this deal in the offseason, did you have a sense for the direction that were you concerned with what was going on with the team? Something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And he's no, I'm just worried about playing, but around that time, he told Michael Vick straight up, hey, my situation is different from Patrick Mahomes. It's different here, how things are set up, how much I can depend on this organization, what he said was they're solid over there. It's a little different over here, So the questions have been there, but to your point, I think that with success has come some, some level of an independent streak and their own ideas and their own opinions. I think that Kemp is influential in his thinking. I do believe that. But you know, they're dug in on what they believe. I think is a righteous cause against how things are being run with the Texans. And even though I don't necessarily agree with every way they're going about it, I can't say that they're wrong in what the point in the point that they're making. Man, I mean, we all agree it's an absolute mess. So it's just unfortunate that they worked this long to get a guy like that, and who knows how long it'll take to get another one. And here you are,
Yeah, and I think you could say they don't deserve to keep him. I think that's
That's exactly
yeah.
what I would say. To be honest with you, they don't.
Yeah, I don't think Cal deserves. I don't think that Cal deserves. A lot of people in Houston. I don't think Cal deserves. And that nothing more fitting was the Sage Rosenfeld, depiction of a story that Derek Carr had been in his office. Cal, for anyone that hasn't listened to this, on the Mike Silver podcast, and he'd been up to Cal and he said, "What's Cal like?" And he said, "I've just been up to his office. There's no desk in there. There's just a giant TV on the wall, and he's sitting in his office playing video games." And I suppose there's a bit of you dies inside when you hear that, because that kind of his handling of the team would suggest that was an element of his apprenticeship, of his under his father to take over this team. But instead of shadowing people managing the salary cap, or and I know when people have talked about, he did go to the owners' meetings with his father, and I'm sure he sat there silently and adjusted his mustache or whatever he does. But I talked about it last week as well, Brandon, when you saw them handing out water to the community, and he gets asked a question from Mark Berman. His wife completely talks over him, and I just thought that was a great insight into what he's like with dominant personalities, whether it be O'Brien, whether it be Easterby, whoever next, that's going to kind of give him the runaround. Certainly not Jamie Roots, but
oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, when you think about how could someone like Jack Easterby gain the type of power that he has? How could he go from where he was in the lane that he was in, within the NFL framework, as like a chaplain, character coach, pat you on the back, pray with you, talk about your life and that kind of thing, to like running the team? How does that happen? Well, the only way is for it to be, with a guy that would have video games over a desk, a guy like that.
There wasn't even a desk.
Yeah, there wasn't even a desk. That's exactly how a Jack Easterby could infiltrate an NFL organization the way he did. Because that was the gatekeeper. That is the gatekeeper. That guy.
Yeah.
So
I think if you think of like Denver or whatever, where it's like there's been infighting with the family for a long time about who controls the team and who owns it and all that kind of stuff, but they've never let it. And look, Elway is not a great GM, and that's why he's taking a back seat, missed on a lot of quarterbacks. Paxton Lynch being the biggest example of that. But they've just continued to be a normal franchise on the surface, and have not let it affect the day-to-day, whereas this is the complete opposite, whereas they trust the non-football people, and it's kind of got worse. And I think when you think about it, though, and I think when you've got all that mayhem going on behind the scenes, and you've got a Russell Wilson situation, which in its root is identical in many senses, a quarterback unhappy, he's not had what he thinks he should have had to go and be successful. The difference is he's won a Super Bowl. And they've been successful in a period of time with an experienced head coach like Pete Carroll, but it seems just there's a lot of a different level of respect there for the franchise when his agent, because we've not requested a trade. However, if we were to have a trade requested, these are the 4 teams that want to go to: the Saints, Bears, and a couple others. And whereas this is the complete opposite, where it's just nothing's been said in the public light, really, apart from one side's unhappy, and it's all sources too. Nobody's come out and said definitively, and And I think that's the issue, isn't it? It's like having that maturity to say, right, this is and it has to come from Cal. Really, it's kind of, this is where we admit we've done wrong, and he kind of did it with John McClain, but not fully, and he has to do it with a joint front with Watson. And even if that joint front is to say we've decided the best thing for both parties is to move on, we've got a great offer from whatever the package Jeff Darlington was on ESPN talking about, that the Bears are desperate and they might, they're potentially got the most chips on the table right now. But if that joint front is we're going to move on, I think that's a lot better than just blindly going, yeah, we don't want to trade the player when everybody knows he's not turning up anytime soon until week 8, so he gets an accredited season.
Right. Yeah. No. It seems like the word for Cal and maybe even Jack Easterby that they struggle with is like atonement. Like you've got to, if not with us, publicly, at least with Deshaun. I know it seems like there's been a communication issue ever since the season ended, and I don't know how they fixed that exactly. Like who it is that is most responsible for the communication issue. It could be Deshaun, for all I know. But yeah, no. At every turn, it seems like they have screwed up the opportunity to do the sensible thing, which, like you said, hey, admit where we went wrong, again, reiterate the commitment to the player, and all the while entertain these offers. Like, I don't necessarily understand what the strategy is, and maybe it is driving the market up. I couldn't imagine that teams that weren't already interested in Deshaun Watson are now suddenly more interested in him because Nick Caserio says they're not listening to, or somebody says that he says they're not listening to offers. I think the market for Deshaun Watson is what he like. You either want this guy or need this guy, or you don't, and So I'm not really sure how much I buy into to that logic of it. So like from that standpoint, why have this messaging of, we're not trading the player. For me, the whole thing seems way just too adversarial, especially since Deshaun Watson's camp or Deshaun Watson himself hasn't spoken on the matter. To me, it just seems like the more sensible thing to be less adversarial and all the while entertain these offers. And, like you can play both sides where you entertain these offers, but you do everything possible to try to massage the relationship with Deshaun Watson. Because at the end of the day, that's still your best option, is massaging the relationship with Deshaun Watson and, basically fixing that as opposed to what the trade could be. Now maybe that's less likely than whatever the best trade scenario is, but it's still the best option.
Yeah, because you think about Hopkins is still talking about how he only got traded for a second, and I think you can probably use that the market's not where it needs to be. I think you can use that sense to appease the player and saying, look, we think the world of you. We think you're worth this three first 3 seconds at a minimum plus add-ins. Nobody's willing to give that up for you, therefore that's why you're staying. If they were willing to give that up for you, we would have accepted. And you think, and I think there's a point where they can do it, but I just think that the parallels between the Russell Wilson situation, which will probably end up Russell Wilson playing next season, in all likelihood for them. But I just thought it was an interesting two kind of similar unhappy quarterbacks, stars at their position. One will be a bit more accomplished than the other, but but handled in a very, very different way. But there you go. It's as we said at the start, nothing much changed, but you could dissect it for a long time. But let's talk about some actual football and some football moves, Brent. How about that? It's a bit of a rarity, I think, with this team. But looks like Will Fuller's going to set and test the market. What do you think of that? I didn't think it made much sense to tag him. And I don't know if that's an admission of where they are with Watson, but he looks like he's going to go and test to see what other teams are willing to stump up for him.
Yeah, well, especially if Deshaun, if there's a possibility that Deshaun Watson's not going to be there, it makes far less sense. It makes far less sense to tag him. And honestly, the way the season ended could sort of change the calculus a little bit. So to me, it was always kind of leaning toward not tagging him. And, and from what I can tell, it doesn't seem like Will Fuller is even necessarily interested in coming back from his end. You know, I know he said that publicly, but I do think that for whatever reason, the idea of being shopped at the trade deadline did rub him the wrong way, and then obviously the way things have unfolded, have changed a lot of things. So, but I do think that there's going to be all it takes is one team, but I think there's going to be some interest for Will Fuller for teams with cap space. Um, you know, the numbers that Will Fuller has put up, and even in limited time, I feel like is going to, still interest a lot of teams. I don't know how much the way the season ended is going to affect the market out, for other teams that have cap space, with him being one of the better options at wide receiver out there. So yeah, no, I'm interested to see what ends up happening. I think it's probably best for the Texans and Will Fuller. As far as like for Will Fuller, he's probably going to end up getting a long term deal. More money, and like you said, it made no sense for the Texans to franchise tag him. So you're looking at an entire makeover. You're not even entirely sure who your quarterback is going to be. A complete makeover of the roster. So that's money that you can spend doing something else.
Well, that's it. And right now, Watson's the only quarterback on this roster which was probably the biggest shock. Actually, I think it was releasing Josh McCown. It was, I think you signed him what week? It was prior to Thanksgiving, wasn't it? So it would have been sort of late October, early November.
It was
early November.
Yeah.
That they signed him, and it seemed like it was all aligned, and people were saying he's just the head coach in waiting and all this kind of stuff. Look, he might come back, but certainly the reports that came out, particularly Aaron Wilson, broke it, talked about I want to spend time with these kids' high school ball. That he's looking for a coaching option, but that's got to be a big consideration for it. I think he's from the sort of Fort Worth area, and and it certainly seems like I don't know if that was an Easter plan, and that's you starting to see a bit of Caserio purely football influence actually making the right decisions. But certainly the sort of grand devious plan or a layer of it is proven not to be not to be true for the first time in probably a long time.
Yeah, the Josh McCown thing is like almost reminds me of like golden handcuffs. Jack Easterby's like golden handcuffs for him. He's got this opportunity for him. Like he's got this. Jack Easterby's infiltrated the Texans organization. He's he likes Josh McCown. They're buddies from fellowship or whatever it is, and he can get Josh McCown the inside track. He can get Josh McCown the interview for a head coaching job while he's still on the team. Like he can get him an interview while he's still playing. You can get an interview to be the head coach. Never mind position coach, coordinator, analyst, none of that. You can be the head coach candidate, but at the same time, you're linked to Jack Easterby. You're linked to sort of the orchestrator of this entire mess, the guilty by association, so to speak. Kind of the same way that Nick Caserio was when he first came in. And so I think that that's something that Josh McCown maybe has had to reckon with over the last couple of months, over time. I think that he's got opportunities way like beyond what the Texans can offer him. So, they tell you that thing about, hey, and Josh McCown's a legitimate family man, but they tell you that whole thing about, hey, I'm going to go watch my kids play and yada, yada, yada. But that just means, hey, I'm waiting. Call me. That's what that means.
Yeah.
Call me with your, position coach, coordinator opportunities, wherever it may be, what have you. He's got ties to Todd Bowles. He could sit out a year and follow Doug Peterson wherever he goes. He's got ties. The guy's been around the league for almost 20 years. Like he's got ties everywhere. So he doesn't need this Jack Easterby thing, and I think he realizes that. As much as he likes and respects Jack Easterby personally, it wouldn't surprise me if you find Josh McCown on this coaching staff at some point between Pep Hamilton, Josh McCown, who's it? They hired Josh McDaniels' brother to do something, in which I'm not
Yeah.
entirely sure exactly what he's going to be doing.
Yeah.
But
Assistant quarterbacks or offensive coach. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not entirely sure where Josh McCown fits into the whole makeup of it all. But it wouldn't surprise me if you see him at some point. But he's got other opportunities beyond just what the Texans could offer. So, and especially, he doesn't need the Jack Easterby headache if he doesn't want to deal with it. So, um, but it's definitely a weird thing. You sign a guy in November, 41 years old. I
On
don't
a
know
2-year deal.
on a 2-year deal. Perhaps was never. I don't know if he was active. He was inactive most games, and he interviewed to be the head coach, and then he's released. Like it is. It's
Yeah.
probably an underplayed story nationally because so many other things between Deshaun Watson and J.J. Watt and all these other things that are going on with the organization. But the Josh McCown thing is just really, really, really strange.
Yeah. And my first inclination was just, I think he's seen this as a sinking ship. And if he's going to step into coaching and you don't get many shots at it, it's not going to be a year. And he's been around enough organizations to realize that when you've got a good thing going or you don't. And I think he's probably sussed it out pretty quickly in the 4 and a bit months he's been around the building, probably not even been in the building all that often since the end of the season, if at all. Then he's just thought, if I'm going to make this step, this isn't the place to do it, considering all the controversy that surrounds it. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting storyline. Probably the move that I've respected Nick Caserio for making the most was cutting Nick Martin.
Yeah, well, you're not alone. I mean, Nick Martin, I don't even think fans and media would even be alone. There are people within that building that I think straight up just didn't think Nick Martin was a very good football player. At the very least, didn't live up to the football player that he could be. I think that there is something to, and one of the more fascinating things about the Texans, particularly with their coaching staff and previous coaching staff, is how many guys were playing out of position. And Nick Martin could very well be one of those guys who, I know a lot of people think could have been a better guard than a center, and a lot of people think that Zach Fulton could have been a better center than a guard. And then it reminds you of, on defense they got a cornerback playing safety, they got a safety playing cornerback. I mean, they just seem like the team with their left shoe on the right foot and the right shoe on the left foot at every turn. And Nick Martin symbolizes that to me from a football standpoint, and then from the inner workings of everything. He's a Bill O'Brien guy. He's one of these smart, tough, dependable guys. The guy who stole the weight equipment and took it home during COVID because he's that hard of a worker, only to show up during the COVID year to give away give away a game. So I mean, I think I don't want to give Nick Caserio too much credit for this move, because I think it's sort of just an obvious due diligence. Why pay this guy this type of money for this type of performance? Just a basic, sensible cost benefit analysis with Nick Martin that would arrive you to letting him go. But to that point, none of us, I don't feel like necessarily expected them to do that. Like, I think a lot of us figured that Nick Martin would be on this team and would probably be their center next year. So the fact that he did it is sort of relieving, even though I do feel like it is the sensible thing that if you felt like you were following a sensible organization, that would have been something you would have expected them to do, or maybe not even expected them to give them the money in the first damn place. But if this is if this is where you are, you definitely got to let that guy go.
He didn't deserve the money. I think that was, and I remember at the time thinking it would be, they had Greg Manser and they had Fulton there, who everybody at Kansas City said was a better center than I was a guard, and then he played left guard but they played him at right guard, and just like Jeff Allen, but they did the inverse. And you wonder if he hadn't got injured in his rookie year, would he have realised his potential that when you draft a centre in the second round, you got to have that guy on your team for at least 2 full contracts, and just more wasted picks. And I saw a thing this week about, if you look at the draft from 2018, we didn't have any picks. The 2019, where they had 3 picks in the first and second round, and since then they've only had 1 pick in the second round. And none of those guys are looking like they're going to be cornerstones of your team. And you just think, that's just a glaring reason why they're talent deficient. But yeah, Nick Martin, I think he had that injury, but then I think when you saw how well Greg Mance did in that year, albeit with Brock Osweiler under center, and then you had change over at left guard, obviously because Suafilo leaves. Why he just didn't slot him in there and make less changes to the line was odd. And then you just never know how much people, when he feels like he's doing everything he can, but we know that he's better than what he probably put out. And when you get that free pass by the coaching staff, that how much do you not give it your all and be the player you could be, because you're told everything you do is great. And he had one good year in 2019 was his best year, but he got a contract without playing a great season, and I think that was just everything wrong with the previous regime. So you cut bait, you save $6.5-7 million in that region, and it it's further money under the cap when you take a JJ as well. But then probably a more surprising cut, considering you traded a 3rd round pick for him. Well, again, I know a huge overpayment in treating draft picks like they're not important to your roster composition and the makeup of your salary cap. But cutting Duke Johnson, whilst at the same time making sounds that you want to keep David Johnson because you've already got 2.1 million dead hit. You save 5 by cutting Duke. I just think we'll always look back on Duke Johnson as an overpayment. Why you paid the 3rd running back on a team a 3rd round pick to get him when he publicly outed the organization saying he didn't want to be there, falling out with his quarterback publicly. So it was a buyer's market at that point. And they never used him. They never used him in a way that he should have been using. He's a cheat code in the passing game. And and people always remember the Tywan Jones set up the field goal in the playoff game, but it was Duke that got, I think it was a 3rd and 16 right before that, and he just was never used to his full capability. Whether it been running outside zone games as a change of pace in the running game, or just being the primary weapon, play design, wheel routes, all the great stuff you saw with James White and all these guys from New England all these years, they never carved that role out for him, and I think they sold themselves, him and the offense with Watson short, by just not getting the best out of Duke Johnson.
Yeah, I never understood why make that move if you're not going to use this guy, or if you're unsure of how to use the guy. Like, it seemed like it was one or the other. Like, they either refused to or they didn't know how to. But either way, it never seemed like he was being used enough. And then, eventually, because of attrition last season, you get to the point to where you have to overexpose the guy for a brief period, And so that was,
and he gets hurt.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like a sick joke, because when he was healthy and when you had an opportunity to really maximize him, you didn't do it. And right, the overpay. It was one of the earlier examples of how bad this thing could really get, is in terms of, lopsided deals or deals that didn't make a lot of sense. But as far as cutting guys, man, I don't get, hey, cut all these guys that are overpaid. You're not going to win with them or without them. Like both the Johnsons, great guys, gotta go. Both overpaid, gotta go. Now, I get the logic in, hey, maybe you can restructure with David Johnson. Not necessary. And if they do, fine, but not necessary. Cut these guys. Let these guys go. Whitney Merciless should be gone already. Don't know why he's still on the team. Why we haven't heard about that already. I don't understand. We're going to keep we're going to cut some fat, but we're going to keep, some of the other. Like, no, cut all the fat. Start over.
Yeah.
Get minimum guys, undrafted guys. I don't care. Late round guys. Get these guys in there until you can fully actually know what you're doing here. But it's time to cut this fat, especially if this Deshaun Watson thing comes to fruition, and with or without him, you're rebuilding this team. You got to make these decisions. So, the idea that you're gonna, cut Duke Johnson but keep David Johnson, for what?
Yeah. I thought maybe Zach Fulton might have been a great way to see if this is a new regime, because he got restructured last year. He's still got $3 million in a cap you can save by cutting him. Now, the fact they've cut Nick Martin, they've maybe just looked at the two and go, well, one of them's got to go. As you said, basic analysis of where's the value. You get a lower cap hit and you've got a guy who's arguably a better centre.
Right.
But then you've got Bernard McKinney, who's $7 million on the cap you can save, and you've got Brandon Dunn as well for 3.25. So there's another 10 over 10 million there, 30 million you can save on the cap. It looks like PJ Hall, Pharaoh Brown, AJ Moore, all those guys on restricted tenders. If they do a role on special teams and you can get a bit out of them on either side of the ball, yeah, I think they're no-brainers, aren't they? Because it's cost control with a restricted tender. And I thought, like, if you go back to albeit it was another epic loss, but in week 17, I thought Pharaoh Brown started looking like he could be a starting tight end in this offense, albeit with Watson. And PJ Hall flashed, and AJ Moore, he kind of does what he did. He got an injury in Pittsburgh, I think, that game, and they actually missed him, just coming in as a sort of third safety. But I think all those guys you can't argue too much with them being retained. But they've got another number of decisions to make. Another third round pick that was disbanded or given away with Gary and Connolly. Didn't play down last year. What do you think about bringing him back?
The thing with Gary and Connolly, we still don't have any answers on what the hell's going on with that ankle. I'd imagine that he should be in a better place, but with Gary and Connolly, it seems like, I cannot imagine at this point bringing him back, even though obviously they are desperate in that position group. So I don't see it. Don't really know what the market for him is. Not really sure what his health is. Like where exactly Gary Connolly is. The fact that he didn't play and that the ankle surgery went as poorly as it did, or whatever exactly happened there, nerve damage or something really weird happened with that surgery, and I think there's just so many question marks there. You're moving on. That's another one of those losses that you're cutting.
Philip Gaines, he'll be gone. Vernon Hargreaves, I don't think you bring those guys back. I think there's too much bad tape to do that to them, far less to the team. Ty Adams is an interesting one though, because I think he views himself as a guy who's setting himself up for a payday. I think his tape was mixed, but certainly he thinks but he's 29. He's a late guy in the league. He's bounced around a lot of squads, and he's not been paid till this point. So unless he comes, for a $1 or $2 million deal, I don't see him paying. But I think a guy, if you look who we've got on the practice or on the field, who's not been healthy, and I don't know if his legs have gone, but I've always wondered all last season what happened to Dylan Cole, and I think he would be a better fit for this 4-3 Lovie Smith defense, because at least he could. Well, at one point he could move and cover that, and drop and give good depth, which you need to do with the three linebackers in this kind of scheme. I don't know if the injuries have just mounted up and he's gone, because he's not looked like the same player or been able to be on the field, certainly in the last couple of years. But a couple of questions at linebacker, and it could be Cunningham and plus new guys. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the thing about Cole is if you want him, you should be able to afford him. Like Dylan Cole is not at a point where, like with Adams, is a different case where he could outprice you at some point. Like there could be a market for him. I don't see that being the same thing with Cole, especially with his injury history. Now, the point you make is a good one, because much better in coverage, can get from sideline to sideline, a little bit undersized. But he can move, and that's what you need in today's NFL linebackers, is a guy who can move the way, well, at least the way Dylan Cole could move before the leg and
Yeah.
and all of these things that he's dealt with. It is concerning that even when it seems like he did get healthy or was able to play, that he wasn't able to get on the field as much. And so, what is that indicative of something about where he is at this point? I'm not sure. So, Dylan Cole is somebody who I don't mind seeing come back, because I assume that you can get him for the bare minimum. Uh, Whereas with Terrell Adams, that one's a little bit more interesting, because what exactly is the market for him? You'd hate to see them overpay for a guy who had mixtape and, like you said, is a late bloomer, and quite honestly, had some flashes and some good moments, but isn't even as good as the guy, as the last guy that you possibly overpaid, that you're gonna have to end up cutting in McKinney. So
Yeah.
So what exactly does that look like? I'm not entirely sure.
Well, I think you'll see more turnover as well, because I can't see Brennan Scarlett coming back when he just put out so much tape. They just couldn't set the edge. So you're never, and I don't think he's a fit in a 4-3. I don't think he's a fit in a 3-4 either, or whatever whatever base they were playing. But
he was overexposed. Scarlett was overexposed. That's a guy who never should play as much as they've played that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He is what he is, kind of a reserve guy who was really asked to play a way too prominent of a role in this defense. And so now that he's overexposed, it's like, now you want to stay away from the guy. Whereas when they had him sort of more so in his role, you maybe liked him in his proper role. Now it's like, yeah, I'm okay on that entirely, right?
Yeah, and I think on staying with the defense, I think another guy who was probably overexposed did actually flash towards the end of the season with Carlos Watkins. Never really played up to his draft slate and showed decent production from Clemson, but he's a guy that, again, I think he's like all these guys, I suppose, that if they were on this team and they're potential free agents and they're not being signed, the talent's probably questionable. So I think he's another guy who you can put down to being a vet minimum, and we'll take you if you want to stay. If not, go and take your chances elsewhere.
Yeah, like what could Carlos Watkins' market possibly be? Now maybe they could surprise me, but yeah, that's another minimum guy. Now, like I said, wholesale get rid of everybody, but you do have to field a team, right? You do have to field a team, and Carlos Watkins, like you said, showed some flashes. A little bit different from Brandon Dunn, from Brandon Dunn, who, to be honest, did not flash at all. So, that's an easy decision. Whereas with Carlos Watkins, if you can get him for minimum, as you said, yeah, you have him in there because you got to field a team. But this is not somebody that, you're investing long term, giving a significant amount of guaranteed money to. And I can't imagine who would be. So yeah, at this point, it should be up to Carlos Watkins, because there's sort of a bare minimum that you're willing to do to keep him. And if he's willing to do that, cool. If he wants to be here, cool. And if not, one thing I was going to say earlier that I think everyone is having to reckon with, unless they're in a position to, to get over and be overpaid. Everyone's got to sit around and think, if Deshaun Watson and J.J. Watt don't want to be here, why would I? And that's not to say that I'm Deshaun Watson or J.J. Watt, but it says something when guys like that, not only don't want to be here, but are actively trying to get out. So what is the trickle down effect for all of these guys, from from those top guys all the way down to a Carlos Watkins? Can you?
Yeah.
You're going to be able to field a team. You're offering money. These minimum guys, you're going to be able to get somebody. But what is the effect of that? I'm very much fascinated to see, like, what, could it be that Carlos Watkins is like the best that they can do on a defensive line that so badly needs an upgrade? You're going through a scheme change. You need new players. Weird reputation thing going on that very much has to do with who you can get on the field.
I think one guy who will have a market is Rod Johnson, which is funny to say because I think when you saw his play last year when he filled in spots, when you heard people talk about him in training camp the year prior, when he came in and filled in for Titus Howard when he got injured in 2019, the 2 games he played in 20 when the Tunsil missed when he had the bout of sickness. I think similarly to what Kendall Lamb had in the year that he played left tackle in 2018 and left and got a $6 million APY with the Browns. I think he's a guy that could potentially get some run because if you think of him, he probably thinks, well, I'm good enough to start. They've brought in other guys. They've traded up to get Charlie Heck when I was still here. He's their obvious swing tackle, and he'll go and get paid. And I think he'll probably will. But again, it's just another example of how this roster's mismanaged. And he was probably a serviceable left tackle, or at least a swing tackle as your primary guy, which they've just overlooked. He'll probably go and play somewhere else and get some money and do well for himself. Because he bounced around after getting drafted in Cleveland, coming out of Florida State. But he's I think he's shown more than capable. He belongs in the league.
Yeah, so the thing that stands out to me, sort of my chain reaction thought with Rod Johnson is how the tackles have been mismanaged, or how approaching the tackle spot has been mismanaged. Just from the standpoint that I don't know how good of a left tackle Titus Howard could be, but I feel pretty confident that he could be a left tackle, which renders the Laramie Tunsil deal beyond unnecessary and excessive when you think of the fact that they had just drafted Titus Howard when they made that move. I know at the time they were still, I guess, bought in on Matt Khalil or thought that might work for whatever reason. But the fact that they didn't see that in Titus Howard was a misstep. And then that Roger Johnson then could have been your right tackle. And you have your draft picks. Maybe you're still as bad this year anyway. And you get that number 3 pick. I don't know. But it just that's what it makes me think of. It's like, there's going to be a market for this guy. But he probably shouldn't have ever been the swing tackle. They just drafted the guy who's a project, in Charlie Heck, who should be the swing tackle. And Roger Johnson could have easily been the guy on the right side. And you could still have those draft picks and not be paying Laramie Tunsil, $20 plus million a year, a laughable contract that agents and teams who negotiate these deals with, these other tackles, they don't even consider the Laramie Tunsil deal. They're just like, did you see that? Did you see that thing that Bill O'Brien and Laramie Tunsil did? Ha! And Jack Easterby did? Ha! And then they go on and be realistic about their business. That's how bad that was. So Roger Johnson, a capable guy, could have easily been that guy, been a part of your future, and probably, if I had to guess, is another one who doesn't want to be here anymore. For what? Why would you want to be the swing tackle on a losing football team? When you have a chance to maximize your potential.
Yeah, I think so. And I think he's just another example of so many that when they all culminate, you're in a position where you're not a football team that's going to be able to be competitive in 2021. I think the hitting rock bottom will probably be somewhere in the midst of 21 when you start to see the knock-on effects still rolling down the hill of all these bad moves that have been made. And I think when I think about it, and you think, are there any reasons to watch this team in 21? I think there's a lot to the offseason to be played out, and they could patch it up admirably. But it feels like there's so many forces and so many historical decisions piling up against this team. It's tough to make any kind of positive case on Sunday, apart from you might just want to stick red zone on and see how it pans out rather than watch every down of this ball club in 21.
Well, one of the big topics that we've been having ever since, I don't know, let's see, I guess since it was reported, like definitely that Deshaun Watson had officially asked for a trade, so the rumors had been circulating before that, but ever since then, one of the go-to topics on radio has been who goes on like the brochure, on the pamphlet, on the, like, who do they put on the posters? Yeah. Who do the Texans market and brand if Deshaun Watson is traded? And even if he's not, like, okay, you put Deshaun Watson on there. Who else? I guess just like Justin Reed and Zach Cunningham and Laramie Tunsil. I mean, and been absent of Deshaun Watson. Look at that brochure. Part of the reason why I'm going to continue to watch him is just because that's just what I do. It's what I do and what I've done. And then now with the job I have, I even get paid to do it. I'd probably do it even if I didn't get paid. But some enjoyment in is the schedule. And that was one of the things that I did last year. I was like, well, at least I'll get to see Aaron Rodgers in person. You almost watch your team just to see the opponent. How do they stack up? How do they measure up? Sure. But there's not a lot there from an entertainment standpoint. So, it's like, well, yeah, I'm just as interested to watch the Cardinals. Unfortunately, I'm just as interested to see, Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins and J.J. Watt as I am in David Johnson and Zach Cunningham. So yeah, no, it's going to be a difficult watch.
Yeah, because I think when you look at the schedule, and obviously that will come out the week before the draft, but you've got the potential of, okay, and just say Watson does hold out, the alternative is I would say put maybe a 10, 15% chance he does actually suit up and play these games. But you've got the Jets visiting NRG, you've got a road trip to Miami in there, and you've also got a road trip to Arizona that we touched on earlier. So of all those games, you're going to have your face rubbed in it at some point. And I think that's, and getting, if it was, to be heavily defeated by a Watson Jets or Miami team, or whether it's to be lose to Hopkins and JJ in Scottsdale, then it's not all that appealing, is it? And ironically, I think probably the Texans' one chance of a primetime game is probably at Arizona.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. That's got to be the only one. I mean, they didn't have but one, plus, I guess technically two national games if you count Thanksgiving. The opener against Kansas City, and then obviously the Thanksgiving game everybody gets to see. But, other than that, and then so there's no reason for them to have one other than maybe that one. Or, yeah, man, that is actually a good one. I'll be interested to see how that schedule pans out, because again, there's another thing when you're promoting matchups. Who in the Houston? Normally you go Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans, J.J. Watt and the Houston Texans. Who in the Houston Texans in this case? You don't.
There's no one left.
There's no one. There's nothing like that. Now, to be fair, there's still opportunity for that to, with this Deshaun Watson thing in the trade, there's still opportunity for that type of marketable face or name to arrive. I mean, they can stretch it with one of these, quarterback prospects, right? If it's I don't know, if it's a Zach Wilson or I guess Justin Fields might be the most famous of them, but I think he's might also be maybe perhaps the worst. Who knows? So, that's going to be really fascinating how they even market the team, how they even are able to brand the team.
Yeah, and I think that's it, and that's what it comes to the heart of it, isn't it? And I think the the point of change is, I think you've got that in the background, but I don't think they care about that. They don't care about what people think about them. They've shown that consistently right through the head coach and GM hire process. That's very much secondary to them. They trust us to do the right thing. Change is hard and all this kind of BS that they throw at us. But I keep going back to the point of, like, I think Caserio is a very principled, process orientated guy. But they're just small moves like bringing back Dontre Hilliard, who was a guy who was signed before he was even here, as one of the first guys to come back and sign. And you just wonder how much partly the pressures of other people or the influence of the consensus building and they doing decision making, will there come to a point where they think they've got, it might be in the draft room when he's got every single area scout, or the ones that are left anyway, they've let go a few so far, but any area scout, and every personnel guy in that war room, and did they pull the trigger when somebody phones up on draft day and say, when the whole build up after free agency, because you're not going to be able to set the light in free agency, does he hold his nerve and just say no to everything and just hope that either that, because ultimately that's probably when you're going to get the biggest offer now. If you don't take that offer, you probably then sit on it for another 8-9 months. And it's just 8-9 months of this tailspin, perpetuous nothingness, that they're in. And it's, and how long do the sponsors, how long does the quality of candidates that they can attract for the new president, if they do hire one, when free agents are turning them down, when they have to go to the report meetings and say, Cal, why didn't you? Says, well, how come we never signed this guy? Thought you liked him, didn't want to come, and all this kind of stuff. And I think, I keep saying, I just don't think we've hit rock bottom yet. And I think there's going to be a moment where you'll feel it. And I think we're just kind of, it's almost like, I think if I think of all the like in this country right now, we've got like, everybody's kind of been given like a continuous stimulus check for all the issues with COVID. Nobody's actually felt the real impact yet, and it's still to come. And I think it'll take people by surprise. And I think this is kind of the same. So I hope not, but it certainly looks like it's going to be tough. But it's, as you said, I think you'd still watch it. And I've heard people, say you're kind of married to the game or you're married to the team or what have you. And I suppose that's true. But how long and how much do you test people's patience and loyalties? It's got to break at some point, and that goes for your players just as much as it does your fans.
Yeah, no, totally. I it's funny. I was listening to some radio the other day where somebody was complaining about spring training, watching spring training, and I'm thinking, hey man, you don't have to watch spring training. Like, go watch a movie, go take a walk, exercise. I don't know. You don't have to do that. Like, I don't know if he just wanted to have a hot take or what it was, but it's the same thing with the Texans. Like, we are. This is an opt-in thing, So we're here for it. Whether it seems worth our while or not. There is a charm, I think, to, and this is not to credit the Texans regime at all for the situation that we're in, but there is a charm to following, and it almost reminds me of that ridiculous brick by brick thing that Cal said. But there is a charm to following your team build something from the ground up. I think that's why people also have been able to get so enamored with the Deshaun Watson trade scenarios, fake trade proposals, who says no, these sort of things that that we've been doing in the content creation business, and especially if you're a fan, because there is something to that, to wanting to watch it, to sort of grow. But with Caserio, with respect to Caserio, I am concerned with, the way I understand the power structure and dynamic to work is, Jack Easterby has a voice and an influence, and he has input, but that Chris Caserio has ultimate veto power when it comes to, some of these more critical roster issues. Like if Casario's against it, they're not going to do it just because Jack suggested it. But Jack's still there suggesting stuff, and he's not going to stop suggesting stuff, and he's going to be around. And just in my eyes, sort of just a little bit of an agitator. I was listening to John McClain talk about it. One of our well-known, probably the most well-known Texans insider that there is, and he was basically explaining that Nick Caserio and Cal McNair meet independently, but not nearly as frequently as Cal McNair and Jack Easterby do. They talk or meet basically every day. Now, Nick Caserio, it could just because he's a lot more busy or a lot busier. But that's still the power dynamic and communication dynamic of it all is that Jack Easterby is in the ear of both Cal McNair and Nick Caserio. So like what does that mean when we start to hit these critical moments, like the moments leading up to the draft? When you get that best deal, when you have to make a decision on whether you want to bet on the uncertainty of the next 9 months, like you talk about the next, what's the next draft class going to look like, and what's Deshaun Watson's, not necessarily just his market, but, what can teams offer in comparison to what you might be able to get right now? I question who all and what all is influencing everything, so Nick Caserio, I think, is a capable personnel guy, but if only it could be that simple, right? And I don't think it is. I don't think it is for a second.
Yeah, I think so, and I suppose the pressure of a GM goes the other way, and we talked about the potential Chicago. Somebody maybe just goes to draft day after free agency and says, "Look, here's the top end picks of our next 3 years, and see what you think." And they just go for it because, as you said, that trickle-on effect and that shadow that has continued to be cast over this franchise will continue to be, and to sit and think you're going to do this for another whole year, and be the butt of all jokes and the complete, the right at the pits of mediocrity, I think is probably a position that will get to everybody, regardless of how hard-headed or how invested in the process and faith and all this other stuff that goes with it. Everybody's got a breaking point, and I suppose that's probably what we're waiting on, right?
Especially for the, for those who are left. Like, it seems like a place that the Texans are essentially a destination now that you are, if you don't have any other options. Like, it's not one of those places where you're weighing, okay, well, do I want to go? Do I want to do this one or this one? Well, no, I only do this one if I can't do these other ones, right? That's I'm only here because I can't get out. That'll be Deshaun Watson if we ever see him suit up, right? That'll be the only explanation for Deshaun Watson ever playing for the Texans again. It'll be because for whatever reason he couldn't get out.
Yeah.
And what a horrible place to be.
Committed to excellence. That is, I'm sure he was probably excellent at Mario Kart. Or, I mean, what was that? Probably would have been 2006. So what's that? He's probably been playing a N64.
It could be what is it? Could it be Grand Theft Auto?
Should have been good at that. Yeah, he was maybe excellent at that.
You know what game I imagine he doesn't play? Madden. Madden, because he doesn't know how to run a team.
Yeah, I think committed to excellence. If only there were some transferable skills about how to run a multi-million-dollar business operation through video games, and we'd all be in a better place, and we might not be in this sorry state. But Brandon, thank you very much for your time, my man. Always a pleasure, and always a lengthy discussion, but a good one. So I appreciate your time, man, and appreciate you for coming on and joining us again.
Thanks for having me, man. It's always fun, man.